Oh, we're live. Oh my God.
We're
That's
live.
me. Welcome to Wednesday. Everybody disappear.
Hello.
Welcome to Wednesday, Secular Soapbox Day here at the Skeptic Haven Network. Today's topic is cult tendencies. As usual, I'll be joined by my favorite co-hosts, Apostacie. Apostacie. Today's special guest is going to be Arch Radish and Damien from the Tall Friendly Atheist Dad podcast.
Woo!
Thanks, everybody.
Hey,
Let's
guys.
start the show. Yay! Welcome to the show, everybody. Woo! One of these days, I'll get that intro right the first time.
It's all good.
Remind me I need to
thanks
shave.
for coming back. Oh, come
Oh,
on.
thank
You need to
you.
grow it, man. Grow it. Thanks for joining me again, Apostacie. Arch, welcome to the show. Damien, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on, guys. Today, we're going to talk about cult tendencies. I think everybody here has got a little bit of history with a cult one way or another. Stacy,
Yes.
what is a cult? Can you define one for us?
Gosh.
What? I can, if you can't. I wrote it down.
Well, why don't you write
Oh,
down your
damn it.
definition?
Well,
and
there's
I
three
can-
different definitions. I don't
yeah,
know which one we're
go
going to
for
go
it.
with tonight. But my favorite one is the a misplaced or excessive admiration for a particular person or thing. I love that one because you're in a cult. I X-Files. I love X-Files. I'm in an X-Files cult. Stuff
Yeah.
like that. Everybody's in a cult at one time. So
Yeah.
cults can be dangerous. Obviously, we've got issues with cults. Go ahead and start us off there, Apostacie, with cults.
Yeah. Well, I've actually just not, just from kind of like on the sidelines, I've done a lot of kind of research on my own on cults. I've always was kind of worried that I might be in a cult my entire life, and shocker, I was.
As it turns out.
Yeah, I remember asking my mom when I was younger, how do we know we're not in a cult? And because people who are in cults don't necessarily know they don't know they're in one. So maybe we're in one. So when I was 18, I started researching different religions like Seventh-day Adventists, and that led me to Jehovah's Witness and Mormonism. And then I just kind of carried on from there. And just wanted to kind of understand why people believed certain things and what grabbed them to be sucked into these belief systems. And by researching cults and what they kind of did with their language and how that plays into it, that's sort of what drew me out of fundamentalist Christianity. Because I realized, oh my gosh, they're all the same. And I also have a couple notes we can touch on this a little later as well, but it doesn't necessarily have to just be religious cults. Multi-level marketing, that they have cult tendencies as well as political cults too. So I did a deep dive into those as well because they were something that I was interested in. So I found that there was a connection with all of them.
Yeah, lots of interesting stuff between each one. There's a connection. There's definitely words that are used, and it's a process for sure.
Yeah.
Arch, cults. Talk to us.
Yes, I am very intimately familiar with this because I was raised in a cult. I was raised, first of all, in a denomination, much like Apostacie said, the Independent Fundamental Baptist movement of here in the U.S. It is a very fundamentalist, very narrow-minded view that lends itself to spawning a whole bunch of mini cults, as it were. So each church has a tendency, and typically is run as a religious dictatorship of sorts. In addition to that, we also join with a larger group called the Institute in Basic Life Principles. Now, has anyone here ever heard of that?
I feel like I have heard of that.
Vaguely, yes. Okay, it's one of those things. Well, I'm going to narrow it down. How many have heard of Bill Gothard?
Yes.
Okay.
The Duggars.
Yeah, and the Duggars. That was where I was going next.
Oh, Duggars, yeah.
Yes.
Everybody's like, oh, yeah, I know that guy.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody, there are layers of visibility on this. I call it the Institute in Basic Life Principles is something I call the most popular cult that no one has ever heard of, because the Duggars, everyone's heard of the Duggars, 19 kids and counting, unfortunately, and the homeschooling curriculum that they used, in fact, their entire way of life was informed by the Institute in Basic Life Principles. My family was also part of that. Now, I've also seen a lot of things happen with families in the Institute that didn't have a camera shoved at them all the time. So what happened with Josh Duggar is just one story of many that I've seen happen in this same homeschooling cult. And one of the things I try to do on online on my TikTok and what have you on my platform is try to let people know that, hey, this thing still exists. Not much has been done about it. We've seen what happened with Josh Duggar. We saw the trial and everything, but the Institute is still there, and it's never really been held accountable for anything that it's taught that has enabled any of this constant abuse. So with this knowledge of the cult, I try to bring awareness to it and talk about it and fundamentalism in general. And I love everything Apostacie said. There you can see similarities with other groups. Once you start looking into what this particular cult, the homeschooling one, did, and you start looking into Christian fundamentalism in general, you can also see where Christian nationalism has really come to the forefront of society in so many ways. And you can also see the different tactics that are used among all these different high controlling groups. I'm a firm believer that all these groups have figured out the mental shortcuts that we use just as a species to try to trap us in their grasp and to get us dependent on them. And I feel like the more we know about it, the less susceptible we are to them.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is humans are gullible.
Yes.
Gotcha. All right. Duly noted. Damien, cults. Talk to us.
Yes. My personal experience, I spent about 8 to 10 years in a non-denominational church that, looking back, I would say they are a cult. If we compare with the BITE model, behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control, there are a lot of the, I suppose, checkboxes that Stephen Hassan wrote about that this church of mine fit into. And it got to the point where, so they took a lot of cues from the American side of Christianity, in that, they were sort of like, sorry?
America.
Yeah, America. Christian.
It's a good thing we're known for. Good job.
Yeah, it's dominionism. That the best government is a God government. Stuff like that. But then on a personal level, they had the idea that demons were causing personal maladies, sicknesses, inconveniences. I remember one woman who said, like, she got a flat tire as she was driving along, and she said that it was a spirit of death that was trying to kill her.
Wow.
And it's like, I don't know how you... Sorry?
I said that checks out. Yeah.
Completely, yes. That's the only possible explanation for it.
Yeah.
And so, it took me a long time to, I suppose, and there was always that fear of hell. It wasn't just the fear of hell, but it was also the fear of doing something wrong so that an evil spirit wouldn't come into you to infest you or make some part of your life hard.
Yeah.
It was always, you had to walk God's narrow path to give you this mystical protection so that Satan wouldn't have his way with you.
Yeah.
So that's my experience.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
That tracks.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it totally does.
I think we can all relate.
Does anybody know that homeschool program that the Duggars use? Because I'm very curious.
Well, I have heard about it because I actually listened to a podcast last year. Someone who was in that homeschool program who actually suffered some abuse from it, and it was hidden. So I had heard of it, and I have seen some of the pages from it, but I'm not personally familiar with it. So just hearsay. And
I did
pretty
take
crazy.
Christian homeschool course when I was younger. It's part of my high school. It's pretty cool. PACE program, ACE program, Accelerated Christian, education.
That's a
There's not
popular
much
one.
education there. It's so scary. Like you just look back at it. Your history book has a Bible and a cross on it. It's like that's not history. So a lot of crazy shit there, that's for sure. But we've mentioned the bite model, and Stacy, can you go ahead and explain that for us? People at home who don't know, like I didn't.
Yeah, so I heard of the bite model for the first time last year, actually, because I'm fairly new. I'm about a year out, and
Baby
I
atheist.
and I was actually listening to a multi-level marketing podcast about basically cult tendencies. So she brought it up, and I was very intrigued. What is this bite model? So I Googled it, and I read through all of it. And as I was reading through each of the little the behavior control, and there's about 25 points on behavior and how they control your behavior, and then information, it has about the same amount. I was reading through, and I was like, oh my goodness, this sounds exactly like church, like not just multi-level marketing. So for example, I'll just go over a couple really quick ones, but behavior, they want to regulate individuals' physical reality or dictate where, how, and with whom the members live and associate, or isolates when, how, and with whom the members have sex. So with that, I thought of purity culture, because I grew up in purity culture. So right off the bat, it's like, well, they didn't really tell me like who I can and can't have sex with. But then I was thinking, no, actually they did. It was very much, and also with how they feel about LGBTQ. That's another way. So when you first read it, you have to actually, sometimes you have to think, okay, how does this apply? And and then down to like thought control. This one was really eye-opening for me. It was instilling black and white thinking. That was huge. Decide between good and evil. For me, everything, the Bible will say how, what does it say? Like there's no gray, and if you're lukewarm, God will spew you out or vomit you out of his mouth. So it's like my whole life was always, you can't be hot or cold. You can't be lukewarm. It's either hot or cold. Yeah. So black or white, right? So
there's also the there was also the idea that if you're not with us, you are against us.
Yes. Exactly. And that's actually right below it. Organize people into us versus them, insiders versus outsiders. And the thought control really was the one that hit me. Encourage only good and proper thoughts. So, you have that always, like, even with the Bible, when they talk about like how the in the Old Testament, it says like, do not commit adultery. But then Jesus says, even if you lust after a woman. So like that goes into your thought control. So, anyways, go ahead, anyone else who wants to chime in. But the bite model was eye-opening, and it really helped process, and then down to emotional control. But there's a lot. Look it up.
I did want to touch on the behavior control very quickly, because that was paramount in the cult I was in. Parents were taught that children were inherently sinful from birth. And therefore they were naturally inclined to reject authority. And everything in our cult, boiled down to, is everyone under the proper authority? So they would recommend that families would take their children when they were just learning to crawl, put them on a blanket in the middle of the living room floor, and then anytime that child would try to crawl off the blanket, they would get a smack and then be placed back in the middle of the blanket to mentally teach them that, you don't go outside of this area unless your parents give you permission. So
I remember
from
hearing
birth.
Wow.
Michelle Duggar bragging about that.
Holy shit. That's
the thing.
Yeah.
But no, what you were saying before, Arch, about authority, that was one of the things that was also punched into us. Now, I didn't grow up religious. I was a teenage convert myself. But yeah, even in the handful of years I was in this church movement, the whole idea of authority was, you as a church member must submit to the pastor's authority, because then the pastor himself submits to the regional pastor's authority, who then goes to the national director's authority, who then goes to the international director's authority. And there was also a verse in, I think, 1 Corinthians, the verse in 1 Corinthians where it talks about Paul kicking a guy out of the church for sleeping with his stepmother. That verse was used as a basis for the belief that the church provides you with a covering. And if you step outside of the church, and in particular their church, you're stepping outside of God's protection for you. And so when I left this church movement, I hadn't left the faith, but I did leave this church movement. And one of the things was saying, well, what about your covering? And what do you mean my covering? Well, 1 Corinthians 5, or I think it was 1 Corinthians 5, talks about a covering for people who walk in God's ways. And I think it was also Romans 8, where it says, what can harm us? Those who walk by the power of the word and the blood and all that kind of stuff. So it was drummed into you that if you step out of line, you're stepping out of God's protection, which is another way that they enforce this control over you.
So yes, we taught a very similar thing, and we used an umbrella to signify it. So it was called the umbrella of protection or the umbrella of authority interchangeably.
Wow.
And the idea was that the world and sin are constantly throwing darts at you. If you step out from under it, you will get hit. Here's the kicker. You've probably seen this if you've been around the internet, they also broke it down by like a 3-level, they would sometimes diagram it like a 3-level umbrella with Christ or God at the head, the father or the man in the family being underneath that, and then the mother being underneath that, and the children being underneath that. So first of all, shitty umbrella design. Second of all, right? And second of all, it was exactly what you were saying. Like the idea was that this covering was so fragile that if you moved away from it for any reason, and the system was designed to fail, like if you did anything considered wrong in your life, literally any negative consequence that happened to you, even just at random, could be attributed to that. And it was made to make you, the victim, feel guilty.
Yeah.
Victim. Yeah. Most of these cults make you feel like the victim. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep. And if something happens to you, it's because it's almost the ultimate in victim blaming. It's strange.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's not strange. As they said, that they've tapped into the part of the human psyche that, all the psychological hacks that make us do things we normally wouldn't.
Right. Yeah. No, that one that really gets me though is definitely that the kids are broken and at fault from birth. That's a big one. Which is interesting because don't anti-abortion activists say little children are innocent? Right.
Yeah.
True. That's so true. Yeah.
I don't get it. On one hand, how dare you kill innocent children? Then on the other hand, we're all guilty and depraved.
And
like,
deserve
which one
hell.
is it, guys?
They literally do not care
burning
about
hell.
you, though, after you're born. Like, as soon as you're born, you're on your own.
That's it. That's how it works. Exactly. Dragons in Genesis here says that nothing says love like attacking babies. So true. Such a loving community.
Yeah.
Your kid deserves death. Thank you. I appreciate that. So nice of them.
I think one of the other things about cult tendencies, and this is something that I suppose I have a unique perspective on being in my country far away from you, is the cult of Trump. What the fuck are you guys doing?
What the fuck is that? What is going on? Why is everybody
exactly
going crazy?
What's
Oh, yeah.
I will say, just speaking from my family's experience, my dad was an independent fundamental Baptist preacher, and he tended to follow people who acted like Trump throughout his life. So even though at one point, I would say back in the late 90s, he actually said that Donald Trump was, the epitome or just the indication of everything that was wrong with American culture and the worldliness thereof.
Oh, really?
By the time Trump got into political power, he had already moved on from Bill Gothard. He had already moved on from the people who trained him in his religious leadership, which are all dead anyway. And he saw in Trump the same traits that he saw in them, and he went right along with it. And I even pointed this out to him. I said, "You're an addict. You're addicted to this kind of personality."
Wow.
Because it's interesting how what I was going to say, like I kind of see now the seeds being planted 20 years ago. Like you had, what was the movie Jesus Camp? Have you guys seen
yes.
Jesus Camp?
Yeah.
That part
That's my life
where
growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same.
that part where
I
they're
saw
out
the
in
live version.
Actually,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
I
like-
lived it, man. I lived Jesus.
you,
Christ.
you had the LARP version.
Yeah. LARPing. I love it.
There was a scene where they're out in the front. Was it the Supreme Court where all the kids are praying and singing about to end abortion and all that, and then they go to what's that dude? Ted Haggard. They go to Ted Haggard's church and act as if he's the Messiah, almost as if he's God's man in America to guide the other God's man in America, George Bush, about how to lead the country.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see back then that was sort of like a soft Christian nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
And then it took the ultimate non-Christian Donald Trump to like ramp it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that he did.
And now the cult that is definitely come from that is QAnon. So that's the biggest cult, I think. It's
So sad.
mixed with Christian. It is Christian nationalism, but that's yeah.
Yeah. Well, now we
Actually,
have an
tell me,
orange
tell,
Jesus.
tell me more about QAnon. For someone who's outside of the sphere like myself, I've heard some really crazy, but probably the craziest I heard was they were expecting JFK to be resurrected.
Yeah.
Is that,
They were.
Okay.
I mean, I'm
For real.
in-
People were excited about this.
then they said he was going to be resurrected. I think this was last November-ish.
okay.
Yeah.
And he was
There's so
gonna be-
much. It's hard to keep up.
in,
There's so
in
many
Texas.
craziness.
He was going to be resurrected, and then he was going to be Donald Trump's like running mate or something. And yeah, so people were all waiting out for days.
Merca.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
We have the best words.
Yeah, they were all
I know
waiting.
words. I know the best words.
Yeah, for him to come back in the flesh, and they were.
How
actually
old would he
kidding.
be? He would be like older than Joe Biden. Like everyone's going, "Oh my god, Joe's too old already."
It was
I've read-
Junior. It was John F. Kennedy Jr. I
There's
think.
so
Okay.
Yeah. So
And
Yeah,
Pat
they're-
Urias is right. That was one of the least crazy things he said.
That-
But yes.
yeah. And QAnon is another one of those cults where I think people can believe or hear a lot of it and believe a lot of it and not necessarily know that they're hearing or believing QAnon like ideas. So there's so many in that spider web. I wouldn't even know where to begin in
misinformation.
yeah, exactly. It stems from there's just so many different avenues to it that I had to listen to an entire podcast to get the gist of it. And also I've watched a 60 Minutes Australia on
There it is.
QAnon.
Yeah.
So if you want to look that up, it's very informative as well. But it has its tentacles have reached globally. So
Okay.
There's a,
So tell-
a documentary too on QAnon. I think it's HBO or something.
oh, there's tons.
all
yeah.
It's-
It's a really good one. It gets down and dirty to who the actual person is. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
But-
so
but,
tell me more. I was just say, like, tell me more about like the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and the 3%ers and all this kind of stuff. I hear those terms, but how do they relate to the confluence of political and Christian nationalism and takeover and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I think this goes back to your point, Damien, about how all this has been prepped for about the last 20 to 30 years.
Okay.
Because when I see the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and what have you, and of course QAnon, I see a lot of shades of what I was raised with. Christian nationalists and Christian fundamentalists have always had a really effective method of spreading misinformation, even before the internet. A lot of people think that the internet was what really set all this in motion. And I say that's far from the truth. It's been happening for years. No one was paying attention because
Or that they just dismissed it as kooks and
Yeah.
they underestimated it because
National
a lot of
Enquirer
people remember
stuff.
the Satanic Panic, for
Yes.
example.
Yeah.
The Satanic Panic, I believe, was like the original QAnon conspiracy. I believe that it was what started the network of misinformation that Christian nationalists, Christian fundamentalists, and those who tended to believe in these conspiracies. That's where it came from. because this all happened in the 80s and 90s, back when they believed that, certain toys were demonic, certain preschool
D&D.
teachers were demonic and stuff, D&D and what have you. And it matured, it developed throughout the decades. The satanic tank
Pokemon are demonic.
Yeah,
absolutely. Have
Procter
you
&
seen
Gamble.
those things?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, that. Well, in our group, the big emphasis was on Cabbage Patch Dolls. They actually believe that the names of Cabbage Patch Dolls would invite certain demonic activity into your home.
Wow.
And you would have to pray and cleanse your house and burn the dolls in order for everything to be set right.
I thought my church was bad. Holy shit!
I had a Cabbage Patch, so I didn't get...
There's your problem. You've been grabbed by Satan. That's why you're not a believer anymore. Actually, Arch, I'll stop you there for a sec, because that sounds a lot like the belief in my church was that certain objects could be infested with demons. I particularly remember someone got me like a wooden elephant necklace from Thailand some years ago. Like, a friend came back from Thailand, and I went to church one day wearing this elephant necklace. And my pastor saw me and said, "Well, what are you doing with that?" "Oh, my friend from Thailand, like, brought it back for me from Thailand." "Oh, you better pray on that, or you better not wear it at all, because it might actually, have demonic activity attached to it."
Yeah.
And there's actually a story, like, our pastor and his wife are telling the story of at the wedding, they received a gift that they believed had demonic activity attached to it, or was like a gateway for demons, and they destroyed it at the reception. Was how far they went.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
So,
well,
yeah, I've seen it. Go ahead.
Oh, I told a story the other day on Skeptic Haven show on Saturday. I'll retell it quickly, but my husband and I were having issues with infertility. So this was back when I was a crazy believer, and I asked my grandmother to come over and help. I wanted her to pray. And so she's like, "Well, we need to walk through your house and see what could be in the house that is preventing you from getting pregnant and what could have a demonic attachment to it." And I said, "Okay." And my husband wasn't home, because I thought, well, if he's around, he'll think this is crazy, because it was. And we walked around, and she went through every room, and she finally saw this Mayan calendar that was like a circle. And it's something he had bought on a Mexican vacation when I wasn't with him. And she's like, "That's it. That's the thing." So we prayed. We threw it in the garbage. We anointed every room with oil. And we still didn't get pregnant, because we had actual medical...
You mean magic doesn't work?
No.
Come on, Stacy.
So, yeah, it's 100%. Like, that is...
But that is interesting, in that the idea that you couldn't get pregnant because God was effectively blocking your womb.
It makes no sense. But
Jesus
I was desperate.
It makes no sense, except in Christian fundamentalism.
Yes.
Even
but
then.
See, desperate people will do desperate things. So I was willing to walk around my house and say, "What is in here that has a demon? And maybe I'll get pregnant."
I rebuke you in the name of Jesus.
Exactly. Well, we said that.
Blood,
and then we
blood.
prayed a bloodline. We
There it is. Yeah.
said all the
It's always
things.
blood.
Yeah. It's always
What is
blood.
with Christians and blood?
I have no idea.
Weirdos, man. I don't know.
It's creepy.
But
It's
the end
so
result
weird.
of
And when
all
you
that-
ask them, they don't know. They're like, "Well, it's natural." No, it's not. It's weird.
It just is.
Yeah.
But the end result of that thinking, I believe, that seeing demons everywhere and thinking that there is like this dark world of oppression that's always around you, and that you're the only hope to stand against it, and your vigilance and your willingness to stand up to an invisible enemy. When you're taught that, then that's going to leave you susceptible to following the people who just so happen to have the solution to make you effective against these things that aren't real.
Yeah.
So that, to me, is why I believe the Proud Boys. That's why I believe the Oath Keepers, even QAnon. I think that's why it's gotten to be so popular. We were taught in my cult that we were going to be the generation that stood up to that. We were taught that we were going to be the Christian Marines. We weren't promised. We weren't promised an education in homeschooling so much as we were promised world domination. We were told
Christian
that
soldiers.
when we were done,
stand up Christian soldiers.
Mhm.
when we were done, we would be heralding in the kingdom of Christ against this increasingly evil world. And
Marching as to war. There's a
Exactly.
song. Yeah.
Do you
Oh, yeah.
guys remember the song in Sunday school, being in the Lord's army? I
Yes.
may never
March with the
with-
infantry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm
Oh,
in
yeah.
the Lord's army. Yeah, and it's like they train you from
It's
4 years
horrible.
old.
It's horrible.
It's totally normal.
Brings me to my next question is what do you think the most dangerous cult right now in the world is?
Oh my gosh,
There's a lot of them.
loaded.
Which one do you
question.
think is the most dangerous?
I'm going to say the blanket cult of Christian nationalism right now.
Yeah.
And I know it's existed in some form for a long time, but right now, just the level of fervor and adherence that we see involving it in all of its various forms, like it all basically boils down to the same thing. White Christian supremacy is the goal. And they will stop at nothing to ensure that it stays that way, as increasingly desperate as they are to keep their power.
True.
That
Damien?
also think corporations. For me, some corporations are exerting a
Was that
lot
Starbucks
of.
you're drinking? Is it Starbucks you're drinking there?
Yes, it was. I'm a member of the.
He has to
Just
get
making
his
sure.
card.
I do indeed. I
Talking
do
about
indeed.
corporate cults here. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, but I've lost some train of
Damn it,
thought.
sorry.
Thank you, Michael. That's all right. Come back to me. Come back to me.
All right. Stacey.
Oh, I think I would probably say QAnon because it is like Christian nationalism. It's a little bit of everything, and people who aren't religious can fall into it, and the extreme religious can fall into it. You get everyone from the anti-vaxxers to people who believe in lizard people. You get a little bit of everything. And again, I think it's dangerous because you don't necessarily know that you're believing cult like stuff, and you can fall right into it. And I know a lot of people who believe QAnon conspiracies, and then I'll be like, that's a QAnon thing, and they're like, what the heck is QAnon? I'm like,
Wow.
yeah.
Mhm.
So I think
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
First conspiracy is free, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Buy two
Yeah.
But
conspiracies,
that doesn't really explain how people fall into it. Like from what I gather, like people like Arch, you grew up in it. But what about people who like me? I grew up secular and then fell into Christian fundamentalism.
Are you talking
So,
about people fall into QAnon?
Well, I want to know
Sorry?
what convinced you.
I think it's like an internet cult too. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like that's how people fall into it.
So I would say maybe some sort of dissatisfaction with current life circumstances is probably one aspect of why people, fall into things like religion or
Right.
QAnon or, corporate cults as well.
Yeah.
Which reminds me, also you said the seeding of this whole Christian nationalism thing. And it brings me back to 9/11. 9/11 was a hyper patriotism time here. Like, I even had a flag on my truck at that time. I was like, I don't have a truck now, but at the time I was like, go America.
You've
I
got a
fell
Prius
into
now.
it, and I think that built, and a lot of people built on that, and I think that probably was one of the little seeds that helped out that Christian nationalism, helped to keep going.
And then you guys went to war as well, and I think the other. So you had 9/11.
When are we not at war though?
Yeah, true. But then I remember like the cult really kind of kicked up when George W. announced you guys were invading Iraq, and then like this battle line was drawn between the anti-war and the pro-war side.
Yeah,
and it was like the pro-war side really honestly believed they had God on their side.
yeah.
And so, and at that time, I was on the pro-war side because I believed God was calling George W. Bush to destroy the Islamic stronghold that was ruining the world, especially the 1040 window. Did any of you guys hear about the 1040 window?
Remind me, what's that?
I don't.
The 1040 window is like the geographical coordinates of the world in which Islam is the strongest.
Oh.
Wow.
So, the idea was that was the areas of the world that we had to pray for to reduce the Islamic stronghold in the world, because, wrong doctrine or something, or,
Right.
yeah.
I remember around that time that, my dad was struggling to try to figure out like how the end times were going to play out because the USSR had fallen, in the late 90s and everything. We didn't have like a major world enemy to really make this, big big bad and everything. So there were all these conspiracies like, oh, the euro is going to make Europe, go crazy and then take over the world and stuff like that. So yeah. So when
Y2K.
9/11 happened,
Yes.
everyone suddenly had a big bad, and they were like, wait a minute, this is going to be the big ultimate fight against good and evil that brings back Jesus. And yeah, like you said, that was what really energized everybody, because like in the late 90s, especially, and I'm speaking mostly from an American standpoint, the stronghold of Christian fundamentalism in the States is just like, we don't know what to do here. Oh wait, we're mad at these people now. So
Yeah, tough stuff, man. Question from, go ahead, Stacey. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
Question from the group here. Question: Are your families still religious, and if so, how do they feel about your apostasy?
Okay, I'll go first because as I was mentioning in the pre-show chat, my wife is still a believer, and her side of the family are still believers. When I first came out, so I was a closet atheist for about 3 years or so, and the only way I was expressing my atheism was online. And then, like, the cat came out of the bag, I had to confess. At first, my wife and my sisters-in-law didn't talk to me for a while. That caused a bit of friction. And I think my wife actually said, "Please do not ever talk with my family about religion ever again." Yeah, it got that bad. But then now they're actually comfortable with me. Like I am who I am. It's like I'm not one of these assholes who goes around and, like, slaps you with a Richard Dawkins book or something. I'm just, you believe what you believe. Like, you look after my kids. Yeah, okay. Yeah, like we're like a very gentle kind of, like, we're not like they're not fundamentalists.
Good.
They're really chill, really, like, soft. Yeah, they're not hardcore at all.
Lutheran.
Methodist actually.
Oh, God,
that makes all right.
So it's more of an easy detente, but there's no it's fine. We're okay now. But if you asked us at the time, it was like, oh my God,
yeah, that's quite a thing. I can't even imagine.
Absolutely.
I'm glad my wife's right there with me. Arch.
That's good.
Well, it was a little bit awkward at first, because when I first started leaving fundamentalism, which that was a whole story in and of itself, I was confronted by my parents, and I told them straight up, I was like, I think that you are all in a cult, and I feel like I need to figure out what all this means for myself. And at that point, my dad laid an ultimatum: you're not to speak about religion at all. Even when I was still religious, I could not speak about what I believed at their house.
Wow.
But every time I would go to visit them, they would just bombard me with everything they were doing in the church and everything, the higher ups and their religion was doing. I finally just told them, I said, look, and especially as, Trumpism became more of a thing and I left the faith, I said, and they became a lot more comfortable using racial slurs and such. Ooh. I was like, hey, I said, okay, I've tolerated this long enough. I said, y'all are way over the line here. I don't want to engage with y'all if I can't talk about what I believe. But you keep bombarding me with all this hateful stuff. I said, there has to be a line here. They refuse to change their behavior, so I deemed it no longer safe to interact with them. And for the most part, that's pretty much where my family's at. I've made it very clear what my boundaries are, and the response has been, well, you're just an apostate, so who cares? So at this point,
tough, man.
You just got to move on.
Do they believe you're going to hell?
Oh, absolutely. They believe I never believed in the first place, which...
Oh, okay.
Of course they did.
If you knew me back in the day, that would be hilarious.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's tough, man. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah.
What about you, Michael?
Man.
You've got a friend.
Oh, jeez. Well, we all know Mike has cowered it out and hasn't told his family yet. The only one that knows is his brother, and he thinks I'm going to hell. Or I mean heaven. Sorry, he thinks I'm going to heaven because I was a Christian at one
Universals.
point. So forever.
So you're once saved, always saved.
Exactly.
Right.
Hey,
best of both worlds. You can be a apostate, drinking, swearing, sexual deviant glutton.
Yeah. And apparently I have to spend eternity with a documented child killer. Sounds like fun.
Great.
6-1
You have no choice in the matter.
Sounds great. Yeah. No,
you are forced to spend an eternity with a child killer.
Yes. And love it. Because everything's happy. You can't be unhappy with it. You have to be happy.
Yeah.
Oh, it's disgusting. Apostasy. How about you?
Well, my grandmother, who did those prayers and enforced a lot of crazy thinking on me, she does know, but she's still hopeful that I'll come around and change my mind. She still treats me like her granddaughter and very kindly. We just don't really talk about it. And my mom, who is actually in the chat right now, she
Hi, Apostacie's mom.
it's Deneen. She, when I told her I no longer believed, she was kind of relieved because it had been a weight on her, because she always had a hard time believing. But I was this very like stand-up Christian daughter, and she didn't know who else to confide in. And so when I told her, I don't think I believe in any of this anymore, and I think I'm actually an atheist, she was like, oh my gosh, okay. So we've kind of deconverted together, and it's been wonderful to have the person that I'm closest to next to my husband, who's also been very supportive, because I would say he's probably has been more agnostic. He was just very supportive of us going to church. Me dragging him along to all of these, getting us joining a Calvinist church, and that's a whole other episode. But yeah, so my family's been pretty good. The one person who ironically has been having a very hard time with it is my brother, who I feel like he lives overseas, and so he's kind of seen all of this from a distance. And when he left 3 years ago, I was a Christian, and now he's like, what, you're an atheist? Like, what the heck? And he's kind of had a hard time with it, because I think he kind of thought if there was a heaven, he'd get in because of like me and my mom. It's kind of strange. Like,
Interesting.
Yeah, it's been an interesting dynamic. So I feel kind of bad, but I don't know how to talk to him about it quite yet. So there's just been a little bit of bumps here and there. So
yeah, it's not easy talking to family, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Grandma, I can't believe you told your grandma. I would never even think about telling my grandma. That's the last person I would tell.
I was, you know what? I was kind of just like, I just want everyone to know now. I think at some point I just felt like I can't keep this in as a secret, and I just want to be who I am, because I'm a very open person.
Good.
And yeah.
So here you are on a soapbox, telling
here
everybody.
I am.
and that helps normalize it too, I believe.
I think
100%.
so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because that's the idea that the Christians have of atheists, like people or ex-Christian atheists, is that we're doing it because we love our sin. We're doing it because we love, watching porn or stuff like that. But no, it's just
drinking beer. Oh, you just love drinking beer.
Yeah.
Matter of fact,
we love drinking from the cup of the cult.
Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, I think what in my case what helped was I was still the same, fairly chill guy, fairly relaxed guy. I cared for my wife's family's daughter, as in I'm not abusive or anything like that. I'm just I just don't believe your God exists.
Exactly.
That's it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and they think that makes us bad, but when you look into it, their God is way worse. Way worse.
But they don't see that. That's like,
even if you point it out to them. Holy cow. You watch my show. Even if you point it out to them.
I love your show.
No, not my God.
But
he loves you.
Context.
Oh God, if I hear context one more time before the end of the day. Vaguely Agnostic has a question for us. What allows a person to be indoctrinated? Stacy brought this up earlier. It's a great question. So what allows a person to be indoctrinated? I know about the ritualistic love bombing that makes you feel accepted, but what makes a person vulnerable to start with? Good question.
In my case, being a teenage convert, I wasn't that familiar with the Christian doctrine. And I found, so the way I started in this cult, for want of a better word, was I was at university. I was sitting in the cafeteria one day, and this guy came up and started talking to me about religion. Now, I was a convert, but didn't have much grounding, and so we started talking, and I went along to his meetings, and it was a small group, and everyone knew everybody, and you could get to know, hey, look, there's this really tight knit of really chill people, and
Just
Yeah.
screaming cult. Any red flags at all?
Yeah,
Anything?
it's funny you say that, because they had church services at their house. Like, at this time, they were that small, they didn't have a building. And so my mum asked me, "Hey, Damien, are you gone to that cult again on Sunday?" They're not a cult. Don't be silly. They're just a really small group of dedicated believers. That's not a cult.
Mom reads definition of cult.
Every time.
Yeah. Damien Reed's definition of cult, ignores it, goes along anyway. 10 years later,
He's on his way.
therapy bills.
Oh man.
I can only speculate as to why my family got into it, because I was basically raised in it. But I do know, knowing the family history, my parents were raised in some pretty, harrowing times. I mean, Vietnam was going on. My dad had a terrible, dangerous job pre-OSHA in a cast iron pipe shop. It was, it was not a great time. And, I can see how becoming a pastor would be a really good way out. Exactly. It would be a lot of safety. And I think that's initially how it started in my family, because, my folks were, and for most of my life, were very poor and didn't have a whole lot of means. And so this offered them a bit of a safety net, and definitely a social safety net for when things got rough. And as far as the homeschooling portion goes, I know my dad was terrified of the thought that he was responsible for our salvation. If he mentioned it once, he mentioned 100 times that he wanted to see us in heaven more than anything. And he thought that if one of us didn't make it, it was on him. So when he found this homeschooling curriculum, because homeschooling was kind of the Wild West back in the late 80s, early 90s when we started, he thought it was the answer, because they purported that it would train your children more than anything else how to stay on that path and see it out through the end. And I'm here along with a whole bunch of other people that say, nope, doesn't work.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yep.
No, homeschool.
So in short, it's some sort of vulnerability exploit. To use an IT term, it's a vulnerability exploit.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Absolutely.
I think
they break
so.
it down sometimes if you don't have that vulnerability. They'll break it down till you're vulnerable and then continue. Sorry, Stacey. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, in the chat, Titus said, many of us were indoctrinated from childhood. I was just told that was the way it is, and to question it was sinful, and was counting on an eternity in hell. And I think when you tell that to a child at a very young age, they believe you. And you're also told to have faith like a child. So from there, that's what kind of gets it to stick. And that's what worked for me. I wanted to be good. I wanted to listen. I wanted to follow the rules. And if that's what the Bible said, I was going to listen. I wanted to please God. And I didn't question anything until I started questioning it. And it was very scary. So, but once I realized, hey, I don't think I need to be afraid of this, but it was the fear of hell that kept me from questioning for the longest time. So once I got old enough to kind of make the decision for myself, like, I am going to be a Christian. I did indoctrinate myself even further. And then when I had my own children, I thought, well, now it's my responsibility as a mother to raise them up in the way that they will go, so that when they are old, they will not depart. And
as for me and my house, we'll
from
serve the Lord.
the Lord. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I did make a conscious decision at one point, but I thought I was doing the right thing, and I thought that was the only option.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, same. No, I mean, I thought that was the only option in the world. I thought everybody was a Christian. I didn't think anybody was not a Christian. I lived in this little bubble. Like, right next to the front door of my parents' house is, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." It's giant letters, giant verses right there. I mean, that's what I grew up with. I mean, my dad told me at the one point, that whole umbrella thing. Dad's here. God's above dad. Nobody's above dad. So we got dad and God. That's it. You know, and you have to follow that rule for your house. I mean, it was so weird that this invisible man.
So your dad does bottoms with God?
Wants to throw people in hell.
yeah,
It was so weird. It was so weird. Definitely the indoctrination. You're younger. They break it down. They make you feel like you have to have this. If you don't, then you're destined for hell. And that was a big turning point. Was that hell was a lot. It was a lot. It was definitely hard to get rid of that hell fear. That was one of the worst ones.
Yeah.
One more personal story I might add if I have time. My auntie was actually a New Age spiritualist.
Wow.
And she grew up in a tough life. Unfortunately, my maternal grandfather was quite abusive, had an anger problem, felt free to use his hands, to beat his kids up, all that kind of stuff. And there was a sense that, my auntie, like she was atheist. She didn't believe in deities, but she did believe in the spirit world. She believed in like celestial travel. She believed in psychic messages, messages from the dead, all this kind of stuff. And I would argue that she was in her own cult, just a non-organized one that was very, very, very loose. It's like a self-styled spiritual cult. But again, I think in her case, it was her vulnerabilities and lack of critical thinking skills that kind of led her down the path. Now she was a wonderful woman. She was like a surrogate mother to me. Mm-hmm. It's just that, in terms of what she believed about the afterlife, I can't help but feel that one of the reasons she was in this group of friends that believed this stuff was because it gave her friendship and gave her a hope. One gave her friendship, gave her answers for the current world, but also gave her some sort of assurance of what would happen in life after death.
Yeah,
as well. I think that's one of the other reasons why cults get a hold of you, is that they give you answers for your struggles now. Mm-hmm. Those answers may not make rational sense, but they give you answers that you can kind of fit somewhere if you turn it sideways and a squint and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
comforting lies.
Yeah.
Yes, comforting lies.
Exactly.
People want narrative. Life's just, it doesn't lend itself to narrative.
Yeah. And I was going to heaven, even if they shot me in the head for denying or for not denying Christ. That was the thing. Oh, you might be, one day somebody might line you up and ask you if you believe, and they might shoot you in the head if you do believe. We all were
told that.
Oh my gosh! It's like, you tell this to a kid, it's like, okay,
to die.
I'm prepared. Okay, I don't want to burn forever, so I guess I'll be shot in the head. Like, holy cow!
I know.
We're doing this to kids.
Are you guys familiar with Voice of the Martyrs?
Yes,
I've heard of it. Yeah.
My church was kind of like had the documentation from them as well, and it had all these really fantastical stories of the Chinese Communist Army sent troops to an underground church, and they ordered everybody out except the pastor, and then 10 minutes later they came out saved and rejoicing, or some really weird stuff.
Meshach, and Abednego type style.
Yeah. Oh my god!
Such a silly story, anyways.
I think I read Fox's Book of Martyrs when I was 12. By the way, 12-year-olds should not be reading that book. No one should, but
no one should.
Oh my gosh!
Dick Dawson has a question for the group. Sorry, Stacey, I always do that.
No, it's okay. It's totally fine. It's totally fine.
Dick Dawson has a question. Any of y'all ever, y'all like Texas all of a sudden? If you all ever hear of brigades?
Yep.
It was a Christian Boy Scout thing in the 80s in my area. Anyways, anybody? No, I haven't heard of it.
Oh, okay. My local Baptist church has what's called Boys Brigade. It is almost literally a Christian Boy Scout, and they have the fancy uniforms and the marching and the memory verses as well.
Salutes.
Sorry,
you got the salutes. I
think there's salutes as well, and there's even like marching competitions for the various brigades.
Wow.
So that they are still a thing. I have heard, but I can't confirm, of girls' brigades as well, which is like the other gender segmented version of
Got to keep them separated.
Got to
keep them together. Too much shenanigans.
Immediately where my mind went.
That brings me back to the purity thing. Somebody mentioned earlier the purity culture. Holy cow! Did that ever work for anybody? No.
Not the
Every girl in my youth group was pregnant at teenage. I mean, every single one of them. It's like never worked. It obviously did not work.
Worked.
I
for
actually,
us.
guys, can I ask you to explain purity in your terms? What is purity culture? Because that's not really a thing
Abstinence.
in Australia.
Abstinence only.
Okay.
You
Yeah.
save it for marriage. That's
that
it.
and a very tight control, going back to behavior control,
Mhm.
Yes.
a very tight
for
control
the
over
bite.
what you wear and how you present yourself, especially if you're female or assigned female at birth. Especially because like the list of rules for women, what they could and could not wear, were easily 3 or 4 times what they were for the men in any given situation, and it was especially true in my particular cult. It's a jumbled up mess of abstinence only education and
does it
control.
Influence the marriage as well? Like, are there still rules for when you're married as well?
In my cult, yes, definitely.
Okay.
Matter of fact, they recommended having sex no more than like 1 time a month.
What the?
In some cases, like it was left up to the individual families, but yeah, it was just like. But we recommend, like we've heard some people have success doing this. It was always a anecdote of some sort that was
or you're called a slut. Cat says,
because I have heard of friends who are like married in purity culture, and I think the overarching thing I get is that they were expected to be at their husband's sexual beck and call.
Oh, that too, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Submissive, completely submissive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like not just completely submissive, but also sexually initiative as well. Like always taking the initiative as well is
very much so.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
I can see how that would damage people and cause. Yeah, just a bit. And like seeing kids grow up in that environment. So wow, okay. Yikes.
Well, and one thing we were taught very early was that it wasn't even so much the actions that you did that made you sinful. It was also the imaginations and the thoughts you had. Going back to the bite model, thought control.
Yeah.
One thing that was instilled in us was casting down imaginations that rose up against God, and so you had to capture every thought. Yeah, we literally had exercises and activities involving strongholds and tearing them down. It was a whole thing. But as you get older, as a kid, you're thinking, okay, well, if I think about eating candy too much, haha. As you get older, that brings on more implications that tie into purity culture, your sexuality and what have you, to where that really. You start to not trust your own brain. You start to not trust your own desires, and especially if you're LGBTQ plus, it is a nightmare to live through. Because I've talked to many of my friends who came out of that culture who were of that, and it was just it was horrible for them, and I wouldn't wish on anybody.
Yeah, that's tough.
No.
That is, that's. But it also kind of goes to like what you're saying, Arch, is that you have all these impurities, but it also like in especially in my church where there were demons of lust or demons of gluttony or demons, like there's always whatever physical problem, whatever problem there was almost always a demon or an evil spirit associated with it. So you would do the Bob Larson thing and cast out the spirit of gluttony or lust or impurity or whatever, and it works.
Yeah.
Not
Not at all.
Absolutely.
Well, no. I will say it works as a placebo.
There it is.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah. Because I struggled with particular things, and my pastors would pray out the thing, and I would feel some sort of relief temporarily until it came back, and it's like
reality.
reality
comes back smack you in the face,
and then you feel like, what did I do wrong?
Exactly. I have to try harder.
Yeah.
I have to try harder. I'm unworthy. I'm all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And you're never allowed to be human. You have to be more than that. You have to use the power of God, which of course doesn't exist. So, you're set up to fail every single time.
Tap into it, Arch. Come on.
Exactly. Lean in.
Eric, yes.
Sorry. Can I ask this question? Really
Absolutely.
quick?
Please do.
Okay.
Please do.
I have it written down because I just thought it would be a good question. What were some of the first indicators that you were possibly in a cult?
Great question.
And because that would probably be the wake up.
Yeah.
So I, as an adult, because I had left the homeschooling phase of my life, behind and into my early to mid 20s, I started, going into fundamentalism for myself. And I started seeing that most of the leadership that I was told were, solid, powerful men of God were being accused of some really horrible things. The person who trained my dad, he committed sexual abuses that I just do not want to recount, as did his son-in-law. He actually went to jail for them. I saw abuses in churches I was in. I was working in church as a staff at the time, and I brought this up to my dad. I was like, "Hey, wait a minute." I said, "That's not what's supposed to be happening." And he's like, "Well, sometimes it does. We just can't talk about it." I said, "I didn't sign up for that."
Oh, wow.
Like, that's like, hold on. You told me that these were great people. He's like, "Well, yeah, and they did great things, but we can't talk about the other things they did, or it might hurt their ministry." I said, "I feel like God, if he was real, would be big enough to handle that."
Yeah.
And that was when I first started thinking. I was like, wait a minute. And then, of course, Bill Gothard himself was also accused of sexual harassment on a wide scale. And he ended up having to resign from the IBLP because of that. And that was what clinched it. I said, there is something desperately wrong here. I said, it's happening too much. I found out that kids that I grew up with were facing similar issues. And I didn't find this out until well when I was an adult. And I found out how many things have been hidden from me. I said, you'll stand up in a pulpit all day and talk about other people's sins, but when it hits close to home, we have to be quiet about it. There's something wrong. And that's when I started finding stories, and I realized, hey, this is a cult.
Which is information control. That's one of the things is, like they control what you like. They'll scream out the good stuff and the positive stuff, but then the negative stuff gets like pushed hush hush.
Yeah. Same with the Bible. Same with their book, the Holy Book. That's Stacy. That's what brought me out. Was reading this damn thing.
Yeah.
Holy cow! Have you read this thing? My God, there's just so much crap in there. Yeah, no, that.
Well, you read it, but you have that filter that you're supposed to read it through.
Yeah.
Oh, that's out of context. If it's bad, it's out of context.
Yeah, exactly. Just following on from Arch, I realized I was in a cult when kind of like along the same lines was do as we say, not as we do. Yeah. The church I was in had I remember like I was told to watch what I watched on TV because, especially I think the TV show Supernatural. It's called like don't watch anything like that because you're inviting demons into you. Then I saw a couple of the home group leaders like sitting in front of a TV watching Supernatural. Hold on, why am I being told not to watch it, but they're okay to watch it? Right. And then like there was a policy for the members to like not be with a woman, like for the men to not be alone with a woman that you're not related to after 10 o'clock.
After 10, I've not heard that one. Okay.
But then one of the female leaders literally eloped with her fiance. And it's like, well, hold on, and when she came back, she was still a leader in the church. And it's like, well, hold on, why? Like, there seems to all these extraneous rules for us, but for the leaders, it's a lot more slack and it's a lot more, why aren't they getting infected with demons? Why aren't they? Why don't they have spirits of lust and all that kind of stuff?
Right. Wow.
Click. There's a light bulb right there. There it is. Yeah.
Wow.
Holy cow, man.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Stacy, what was it for you?
Oh, well, I think like I was saying, how researching just other cults and other belief systems, and then sitting back and realizing, hey, wait a second, this applies to what I'm in right now. And also, like I was mentioning with multi-level marketing, I had been in a multi-level marketing business, and I realized how I kind of fell for that one, and now I'm seeing how all religion at that point I realized they're all cults. I was kind of putting them in little boxes like this one's not a cult, this one's a cult, this one's not a cult, this one's a cult, so I'll join this one because it's not a cult. But then I realized, wait a second, they're all cults. And then I between the multi-level marketing and religion, I was the common denominator. So I was like, well, okay, why am I so susceptible to joining these things? And I think it was the group mentality and just the group thinking and being accepted. And also I was feeling very devout to my Christian faith, but I started picking apart what they believed, and also, like you said, Michael, just the Bible, and I got into like how it came to be, and I started picking that apart. And once I discovered that, I was like, okay, no. And after 38 years of believing, it was like one day was just like, okay, no, this is not real. And it wasn't a scary feeling, as like, I know that might be shocking, but it was actually a very freeing feeling. And I was excited because I thought, well, now I get to actually learn about all these things that I've never got to learn about. And I was excited every single day to wake up and not have to believe this and not have to like instill it into my children. So yeah, it was just a bunch of different little things, but mostly just the dissecting cults.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, this episode.
It's a good way to do it, though.
Yeah.
Sorry, Arch.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so it's basically contrary information that you were allowed to discover for yourself.
Yeah.
That got you out.
Yes. And we had moved away from our church, from everyone, 5 hours. And I was kind of like, oh, I'm going to just listen to this now. I'm not going to listen to sermons. We hadn't found a church. And I was like, this is actually way more interesting. I want to know more about this.
You must have been listening to the Tall, Friendly Atheist Dad podcast.
I probably would have come across it. But yeah.
Don't trust that guy. He's
I heard he's Australian. I don't know.
Yeah. Australians are idiots. So yeah.
They're not American. I don't know.
I'm partial to them.
They throw their shrimps on the Barbie. I mean, come on.
We swat the flies away. So,
is that true, though? Do you throw shrimps on the Barbie?
No.
That's weird. It's such a weird thing, anyways.
No,
Awesome.
maybe in the 80s we did, but not anymore. It's,
okay.
We're probably going to throw our tofu and our wagyu on the Barbie instead.
When I was down there, I did cook a kangaroo burger just to say I did.
Yeah.
Had to be
careful. They'll kick your ass. Apparently, that's what I hear.
True.
Pretty strong.
They are. Yep. They'll fuck you up.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
That's all right. You're welcome. If it's not the kangaroos, it's the sharks. If it's not the sharks, it's the snakes. If it's not the snakes, it's the bees.
The spiders.
Cane toads.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Thanks, you guys, so much for your time today. Arch, leave us with some final words and where we can find you. Damien after him. Go ahead, Arch.
Absolutely. If you want to find me, I'm Arch Radish on TikTok. I'm mostly there because it's low effort. But I really do appreciate y'all having me on here. And hey, I do encourage everybody, if you've never heard of it, research Bill Gothard, the IVLP. There's plenty of resources on what all they did. And I feel like if you did so, you'd understand more about the way the world is today. So, and do follow me. And I have several resources too that I can point you to where you can learn more. So thank you guys for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Absolutely, Arch. Thank you. Damien.
That's me. Yes, so I am the host of the Tall Friendly Atheist Dad podcast. Look for it on Anchor or any good podcasting platform, maybe even some of the bad ones as well. The Tall Friendly Atheist Dad podcast. And the other thing that I'm doing right now is the Great Televangelist Showdown. So if you go to tallfriendlyatheistdad.com or go to the Twitter for the podcast, twitter.com/TFADpod, every few days I'm having a one-on-one poll featuring 2 televangelists. We're currently into match 2 at the moment, which is Bob Larson versus TD Jakes. The voting for that will close in an hour. And the next matchup is Paula Kane versus Franklin Graham.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
So 32 televangelists in one-on-one showdowns, and the winner will be announced on Christmas Day. So that is tallfriendlyatheistdad.com, twitter.com/TFADpod, and anchor.fm/TFADpod as well. There I am. Check it out.
I just subscribed to you right now. It's that easy, folks.
Hey! It is easy. And I didn't pay him.
Be there.
Literally, I just did it. Yeah.
Maybe $2 here and there. Stacey, where can we find your stuff?
Well, you can find me here on Wednesdays with you, Michael. And I'm on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and
TikTok, there it
Facebook.
is.
So yeah, you can find me, but I'm mostly active on here because I find this to be the most fun and engaging. So
much fun.
Wednesdays, yeah. So, and Michael, we never ask you, where can we find you?
Well, I
He's
can be found at
everywhere.
thebiblesayswhat.com.
Yes.
I also have a book and a podcast and all that fun stuff. Thank you, Damien, for giving me such a wonderful guest, Lewis. Yes. Check
You're
that
welcome.
out. That's a fun show.
You mean the episode I Lost My Shit?
That's the one. I
That's
lost
the
my
one.
shit. That's the one. I couldn't stand that guy. He's fun. He was a lot of work.
Your show
Thank you
is
guys so
great.
much.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Also,
Thank
quick
you,
shout
guys.
out to Titus, Imus, and Ryan. Love you
Yes.
guys.
Also, Dragons of Genesis, check out his show. He's a great guy. Jason over there. Thank you, everybody, for showing up today. Thank you for all your
everyone.
comments and conversations and everything. I'd like to thank the patrons of the show. Patrons, don't forget, I haven't forgotten Wes. Bassthrasher, Kathy Cotton, Cindy Plaza, Bryce, Deborah Grace, Aaron Coalson, Phil Cauldron, and Sunny Shell. Thank you guys so much for your patronage. Don't forget to spay or neuter your pets. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.